Hello students and welcome to week 5. This is our final week of our FSN 319 course, and during this week we are going to talk about food law. Sometimes it's also known as food regulations. So food law and food regulations are the laws related with food processing, food standardization, food quality that government agencies put in place to assure that the products that we are consuming, or the products that reach consumers, are or follow all the guidelines and are healthy and are safe to eat. So today's learning objectives are to recognize regulatory and federal agencies involved with food, outline the history of USDA and FDA, distinguish between misbranding and adulteration, describe standards of identity, identify changes to standards of identity, and discuss novel foods. So as we have mentioned before in some of our first presentations, we have two main agencies in the US. One is the United States Department of Agriculture, USDA, and the Food and Safety Inspection Service is the branch of USDA that is in charge of inspecting and making sure that companies comply with regulations. And the Food Safety Inspection Service is the FSIS. The other agency is the Food and Drug Administration, FDA, and the center that is in charge of all the food safety and nutrition. It's called the Center for Food Safety and Applied Nutrition, the CFSAN. So as we know, both USDA and FDA regulate other things than food. So these are the branches that deal directly with food. So the USDA regulates meat, poultry, and eggs, and we have here three of the most important regulations, which are the Federal Meat Inspection Act, the Poultry Products Inspection Act, and the Egg Products Inspection Act. So why were these acts created? So the importance here is that before these regulations were created, there was a lot of diversity in terms of quality, in terms of so maybe products where the quality of products was heterogeneous, like you would not expect the same quality from different manufacturers. There was a lot of maybe not very good practices in manufacturing. So the idea behind these regulations is to, one, standardize and create like a minimum requirement for manufacturers. So with these guidelines, you can expect at least standard quality in the products that you are consuming or that you are using for further processing. So that's the importance of regulations in the US and in all the world, but here we're talking about specifically the US. So another part of USDA is that USDA creates as grades and standards, and this is the same, has the same purpose. So there's, as you may have seen in the supermarket, so there's different grades or different standards, and these are created for quality purposes, but also as a marketing differentiation strategy. And I recommend that you guys check the link of this document. And some of the examples of products that have grades and standards are beef, dairy products, eggs, fish and seafood, fruits, grain, vegetables, poultry, and many others. And in terms, for example, of eggs, so the different standards sometimes has to do with the size of eggs. In some of the fruits, the standards depend on defects. So the lower the defects, the better the standard. Because sometimes fruits, for example, for consumption, for final consumption, they have to be have to have a better quality, less defects. But sometimes fruits that are used for processing, say, for making, let's say, strawberries and for making jams, well, they can have more defects because they are going to be further processed. So these are the purpose of grades and standards, to make the differentiation and to have different categories. And then depending on, of course, the higher end categories or grades are going to be associated with a premium price. But that doesn't mean that the lower grades they don't have a good quality. It's just that they have the standards they have to comply as are less severe than the other ones. But then as a consumer, you have the choice to decide, and you can also have these guidelines and decide for yourself what type of products you want to buy. But also it's good for manufacturers, because sometimes they need a specific grade or specific standard, and then they can ask their suppliers, and with that they can comply with their internal regulations. So this is something that USDA does, and we have seen also in beef, for example, we have different types of adjectives like choice, USDA grade X or Y, and this is important, and this is associated with standards that companies have to meet. So here's another example of regulations. So all types of food, regardless of how of what they are, they normally have regulations both in the US or internationally. So regulations are so important to standardize. So here's an example of butter color grading. So there's a USDA color guide for butter, and normally regulations are associated with analysis. So food analysis, and depending on the type of analysis, there's different instruments that are involved. And then depending on the type of, for example, in this case is color, which is a quality attribute, and how this is associated to a grade, right? So USDA normally will describe a methodology. So color, maybe it's a spectrophotometric method. So it will tell you how to measure color, what are the specifications, and then depending on the outcomes, then you will have different grades. Like here we have a color scale, and this color is one of the most important quality attributes. These also apply, not the same methodology, but the idea of quality and color can apply to many different things, like, I don't know, coffee, teas. So there's many, the quality of many things is associated with color, and that's what regulations are for. So here also there's a grading for maple syrup. So depending on the type of, also it's a spectrophotometric measurement, and depending on the type of result, then you can classify the grade A color classes. So we have a golden, amber, dark, or very dark, and then how the color is also associated with taste, right? So they have different attributes to describe taste, like delicate, rich, robust, and strong, and these are associated with the measurement of color. And so these are specifications from a USDA, and so normally, as I mentioned, so the quality attribute is defined. So in this case, color, then you have a method that you have to follow, and then depending on the results, then you can classify or categorize your product on this. For example, in this case, we have 4 categories that go from golden to very dark. And then your suppliers or end consumers can also have this knowledge and decide what they want to buy. And this is very important for standardization purposes and also for transparency with the consumer. Here's more information, as I mentioned before. There's some types of maple syrup that are specifically for the end consumer and have to follow specific characteristics, and there's other maple syrups that are more for processing, so there's processing grade. So normally processing grade has a lower quality because it's going to be further transformed into other things. And this is similar to what I was mentioning about like blueberries or strawberries. So the strawberries that we are going to consume them raw and are for our the end consumer have specific characteristics, and the blueberries or strawberries, raspberries that we're going to use for jams, they have other characteristics. Normally the ones that are going to be for like the end consumer are going to be more expensive and have less defects, of course. Then we have another important criteria, that is that USDA and FDA can work together, and this is called the dual jurisdiction establishment. So for example, we have in this slide two types of pizza. One is a 4-cheese pizza, and the other is a sausage and pepperoni. So the sausage and pepperoni has meat, and meat is inspected by USDA. The rest is inspected by FDA. So that's why we have a symbol, and that it says US inspected and passed by Department of Agriculture. So both USDA and FDA will have to inspect this product. In the case of 4-cheese pizza, only FDA will be responsible. And here we have the thresholds for USDA versus FDA, right? So if we have more than 3% raw meat, USDA, more than 2% cooked meat, USDA, and we have less than 3% or less than 2%, then we have FDA as the agency that is going to inspect these products. So now moving on to FDA responsibilities are to ensure food to be safe, wholesome, and sanitary. And some of the history of FDA in 1862, it originated, it was a single chemist under the Bureau of Chemistry, which was the USDA. Then in 1906, there was a Federal Food and Drug Act passed, which are the regulations. So the acts are the regulations or the laws. In 1927, there was a Bureau of Chemistry changed to Food, Drug, and Insecticide Administration, and then 3 years later, it was shortened to Food and Drug Administration, or FDA. Then, like in the 1900s, there was a group that was called the Poison Squad, and it was a self-proclaimed group of chemists, and they used to try unconventional things or products, ingredients, and then see the effects they had in their health. So it was a little bit dangerous, but this was something that was done at that time. Maybe they didn't have as many analytical techniques or instruments technology. So people or this group of chemists, they tried several things, and then depending on the effects they had in their health, they decided if it was safe or not to eat. So when we have regulations in place, the idea is that we have agencies want to protect the consumers, and then there are two things that can happen, and that regulations have to act against, and these are misbranding and adulteration. And these are two very different things. So misbranding is when you are including statements, design, or pictures in the label that are false or misleading, or maybe you're failing to provide required information in the label, right? But this is sometimes done for like a marketing purpose, or maybe you are like saying, oh, this product is high in antioxidants, and maybe it really is, but you don't have any like scientific evidence, or maybe you're using a picture and that's leading to some like misunderstanding, or maybe you're marketing something as very healthy when it is really not as healthy. So this is misbranding, and that's why we have been talking about like food labeling regulations and the requirements in nutrition facts, and what are that we have to include the different composition compounds and daily values, and so the 8 basic elements of labeling. We talked about like the net content, the manufacturer, the nutrition facts, the ingredients, and so. And then the other type of very, very big problem that the food industry faces is called adulteration. So adulteration is something that you do on purpose and has the idea of taking advantage of the consumer, and with already knowing that it's going to cause a harm. And adulteration is when you add, you can add, you can substitute, or you can subtract something from constituents, and that will make the product unsafe or poisonous or insanitary. So sometimes, most of the times, adulteration is done with products that are expensive. So say, for example, you're saying that some spice is like saffron, and maybe it's not really 100% saffron, maybe it's mixed with something else. Or maybe you're saying that you're buying like 100% olive oil, and maybe that's not true. Maybe you're mixing the olive oil with other cheaper oils, like let's say corn oil or soybean oil. Sometimes you're saying that your spices are the best quality, and then maybe you're not really, maybe you're adding color additives to make it look nice, and those are examples of adulteration. Sometimes fruit juices are also adulterated. You're saying like you have, let's say, a pomegranate juice, which is expensive, and then you're using other cheaper juices. I don't know, grape or cranberry. So this is a practice that is very, very bad, and it is or it has to be like penalized by the law, and sometimes people have to go to jail and respond trials, and so. But it is very, very bad in this practice, and that's why there's so many implementations of methods that are able to detect this type of compounds or adulteration practices. So this is a very interesting topic. There's much more to cover. But the important part is that it is something that happens in the food industry, and it causes a lot of course, negative press, but also it can be dangerous for the consumer. Sometimes people also, like, for example, milk, they can adulterate it with adding water, and what happens if the water does not meet the regulations? So then you have a safety problem, not just a problem for being disloyal and adding water to milk, but also you're causing a safety issue for the final consumer. So yeah, adulteration is penalized by law, and it's something that unfortunately happens in the food industry. So if you guys think about examples that you have heard in the news about cases in which this type of practices happen, that will be very, very important. So as I continue with our topic of regulations and making products standard, so having or expecting the same thing from products, there's something called the standards of identity, or SOIs, and the importance is that they protect consumers, and then they also have the principle of making manufacturers accountable, and also having consistency throughout manufacturers. So let me give you an example. We talked about, like, say, butter, right? In a previous Delipids presentation. So say butter has a standard of identity, and the standards of identity will tell manufacturers what is expected, right? So sometimes we have, let's say, minimum of 80% fat content from milk, right? So that's a standard of identity. So if you want to call something butter, then you have to make sure that at least 80% of the lipids come from milk fat. And there's many examples, and most of the products have standards of identity. If you cannot find it here in the US, you can look at international regulations and like the Codex Alimentarius, and then one of the assignments will be for your final projects will be to find the standards of identity of your products. Other examples are, for example, juice. So if you want to say something is 100% fruit juice, then it has to contain X amount of fruit or fruit solids, or depending on the type of product. So there's many standards, and most of the times they have to be with composition. So it has to be like the concentration of fruit, the concentration of sugar, the concentration of fat. Like if you want to call something ice cream, it's different, or the standards are different. If you cannot comply with those standards, then you will call the alternative like a frozen dessert. Or for example, with cheese products, in order for you to call something cheese, you have to comply with specific fat protein content from milk. And if you cannot comply with that, you cannot call something cheese, or you cannot use the word cheese. And that there's a lot of like fight in regulations and regulatory agencies, and there's different players. So this is like, there's lawyers that are do specialize in food law. So this is something like a big area of interest. So we have different standards of identity for products, and you can find them in the chapter Title 21, Chapter 1. And then we have, say, standards of identity for milk, cream, macaroni, noodles, all the pastas, vegetable juices, tree nuts, peanuts, cheese products, canned fruits, margarine, eggs, and egg products, canned fruit juices, frozen desserts, beverages, frozen vegetables, bakery items, fruit butters, jellies, preserves, fish, shellfish, sweeteners, syrup flavors, canned vegetables, cacao products, food dressings, flavoring. So for any type of food, there's a specific standard of identity, and the standard of identity will tell you things of composition, processing, the analytical methods that you have to use, and so on. So it's very important that if you want to call something cheese or ice cream, you have to comply. If you don't comply, you cannot use that. And there's, of course, nowadays a lot of like fight and misunderstandings between, for example, milk and alternative proteins. And because normally milk, or for example, cheese has to be from cow milk or other types of, like, say, goat milk, etc. And then if you have, like, say, a vegan type of cheese, you cannot call it like that. So there's a lot of like regulations that are in place, but also regulations are something that constantly change or are being updated, because the world changes, consumer needs change, consumer wants also change. So regulations have to adapt. Technology changes, so they have to adapt. So here's an example: milk and cream, Title 21, 131. Milk is the lactose secretion practically free from colostrum obtained by the complete milking of one or more healthy cows. And this goes similar to what I was saying about calling something milk. So here, for example, we have non-dairy milk. We have the word milk alternative. Okay, so you're using the word milk. Dairy-free beverages. You have using the word dairy. So at the beginning of this new market, they were using the word milk or milk and dairy. So there was the institute or of dairy producers. They were like, you're using milk or using dairy as something negative, right? So they changed the regulations, and now we have so many alternative proteins. It's like oats, almonds, soy, macadamia, coconut, hemp, rice, pea protein, and flax. So they went to the National Meat Producers Federation This represents a farmer-owned dairy cooperatives on Capitol Hill since 1916, and they had the petition to avoid the use of milk or dairy as a negative with a negative connotation. So that's why they had this change, and now it's called like protein beverages and so, because you're using something, so you're affecting the milk producers, you're using their name, or so using words for negative association, or a marketing alternative. So you can see that associations or producers or federations, say for example dairy products, berry producers, meat producers, they are groups of people that get together and they have a lot of power in also regulations, and that is very important to consider. So now changing gears a little bit and related with regulations, and as I mentioned before, the world is changing, technologies are changing, consumer needs are changing, and then we have to pass new regulations and so. So one of the trends in food is cultured meat. So we have some links here for you guys to read. I recommend you guys read it. So we have food made with cultured animal cells, and that's a link about the perspective of FDA. Then we have USDA and FDA announced a formal agreement to regulate cell culture food products from cell lines of livestock and poultry. And then we have another link of lab-grown chicken. Okay, so these type of products are, if we have like the traditional alternative, we know, for example, chicken or livestock, or what it takes, right, for to raise chicken or to raise cows, all the other process, the food that is required, all the medical assistance and so, and then we have all the processing for getting meat or chicken. And then this culture meat is totally based in biotechnology, so using animal cells and culturing that in, like, say, a vessel, using biotechnology to do this. So there's a lot of regulations, and regulations have to do a lot with safety for the final consumers. If we think about chicken or meat, the traditional, and we are concerned sometimes about the use of hormones or antibiotics and so. And then when we talk about cell culture food products, then we have other challenges. We have new technologies that are being used. We have to test for like safety of these products. So something similar to what we were talking about last week about like non-thermal processes and all the validation that has to be done. So the same thing happens with culture meat, and of course the acceptance of consumers. But regulations are very important for these products to move along, and there's a lot of work that is being done because it's something new, and you have to make sure that these products are safe for the consumer. So this is more links about all the investment that has been done or is being done for the production of culture meat. This is the name that most of the time is used, and there's many investors, and there's a webpage called Meet the Future, and that there's a lot of resources about this type of companies. And Upside Foods Engineering Production and Innovation Center is a company that works mainly with chicken, and as I mentioned, you isolate a cell line from animals, the specific animal that you want, and then you give all these cell lines all the nutrients that they need to grow and produce the meat, right? So it's like meat that is being created in like industrial scale, but using like biotechnology or engineering. There's other players, and this is more, I also encourage you to watch the videos more related with say culture seafood, like Blue Nalu or Finless Foods. And this is also an answer to the increased consumption of seafood. and how these new companies are innovating and creating the path for new innovations. So there's many challenges in the world. There's food hunger challenges, uh, security of food, and so there's these new and interesting innovations. They require a lot of regulations. They require a lot of testing, and of course, consumers' acceptance. So to end this presentation, the questions that you should be able to answer are: why were the USDA and FDA formed? What is the difference between beef branded and adulteration? Why did the FDA create standards for foods? Are standards changing? How can organizations make changes to existing regulations? And what are the background and regulations of culture meat? So thank you. And if you have any questions, please reach out, and I will see you in the next presentation, which is our final presentation.